Welcome, my fellow Americans. I'm Bill Lipinski, and I'm here with my good friend, Ray Hanania.
And welcome, everybody, to Two Guys on Politics, Season 2, Episode 14. We got three different topics we're going to talk about. They had the GOP debate last night, the third one. We got early elections that were in several states. Ohio was one, I think, Virginia, and was it Kentucky?
Kentucky and Tennessee, yeah, because Tennessee, that's a southern state, obviously, but they do have a Democratic governor there, and he was reelected.
Yeah, and those aren't crucial states, but still, it's important to see what was going on. And then we're going to talk about, should Ukraine have elections? I understand that President Zelensky postponed them. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And is anybody talking about Ukraine? What happened? One day it's like the most important thing in the country, and the next day it's not. What do you want to start with first?
Let's talk about the election. There's Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, Ohio. The point that I wanted to make in regards to this election is I think it shows that unless the Republicans can come up with a new position on abortion, they are going to have a very, very difficult time winning in 2 years from now, because I think abortion was the overriding issue in almost every one of these races. I happen to be pro-life. I've always supported pro-life. I voted against federal funding for abortions when I was in Congress, but it's quite obvious to me that the American public is not there. The American public is for, I think in many cases, they're for abortion on demand, which I think is terrible. But unless the Republicans can come up with, say a 20 or 25 week ban and really articulate that and say why they should have that, I think they're going to continue to lose elections. I think they have a great chance because of the situation with two wars going on that people are getting tired of. Inflation, particularly inflation hitting us when we go to the grocery store, when we go to buy gas. I mean, I think those are very significant issues, all three of those things. But at the present time, because of the way the Republicans are handling the abortion issue, those issues just do not seem to be coming to the surface. And those are the issues the Republicans need to exploit in order to win in 2 years from now.
Yeah, in other words, the abortion issue. Obviously, you're right. I mean, when I look at all the stories about all the different states, these aren't the main states, but it is the beginning of the election cycle and gives us kind of a sense of, what we can expect next year, right? It seems, though, to me, Bill, before we get into some of the details, I think you raise a great point about the abortion issue driving almost the Democratic wins in all these states. But isn't it early? I mean, it's 2023. The presidential election is until a year from now. And I thought the first real primaries would begin like in February or March. Did they change the schedule, do you know, or have they always been doing this?
I think there's a couple of primaries in January, but the abortion issue, ever since Roe v. Wade was struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court, any election that has occurred where abortion became an issue, it was the people who were pro-abortion that wound up winning the election. So I mean, the writing is on the wall. The Republicans have to get themselves a position, as I say, maybe 25 week, after 25 weeks, you can't get an abortion other than for rape, incest, or the life of the mother. And then they've got to articulate that, because I think most Americans would be happy to accept that kind of restriction, but they just seem to now run away from the issue, and the Democrats keep hitting them over the head, and we never get around to talking about the inflation. We never get around to talking about the two wars that we are now involved in. Thank God we don't have any of our troops on the ground, but it's costed us an awful lot of money, these two wars, the one in the Ukraine and the one in the Middle East. And as far as Ukraine, it's tough to find anything about Ukraine anymore in the newspapers, because the war in Gaza, as you call it, is just dominating the news so much.
Right. And looking at these elections, I mean, I always thought that the moderate position on abortions, a centrist position, was that, you can have abortions up to, 6 to 15 weeks in a pregnancy at the most, the first trimester, for reasons of incest and or rape or the health of the mother. And the debate has always been about, should it be between any time or no time? It sounds like the Republicans just didn't focus on this enough to drive that message home, that a lot of them, I think, do support some restrictions on abortion, but not completely banning abortions. Is the Republican position to ban abortions completely in every case? Because that's a losing proposition, I think.
Well, I think it depends upon the states. Now in Virginia, the governor there, he was proposing, if he captured the Senate and the House for the Republican Party, which he campaigned for very strongly, I think he wants a 15-week. Now that might be a little short. I mean, I would have to go into it more thoroughly, but I think that 20 or 25 weeks, certainly, I believe that would be accepted by 80% of the American public. But the Republicans, just that they don't campaign about it one way or another. They're trying to ignore it. And the Democrats keep attacking. And I don't know what the Republicans are doing in these campaigns. As I say, the inflation situation is really a very, very difficult situation for the Democrats. And yet the Republicans aren't really saying much about that at all. So, I mean, the Republicans, if they're going to make any headway in a year from now, it's only a year away now, they better get their acts squared away, or we're going to wind up with a Democratic president, Democratic Senate, a Democratic House. And as I have always said, I am very much opposed to one party ruling everything in Washington, D.C., because the extremes take over and we get a lot of legislation that most Americans do not want. It's the same thing when the Republicans control everything. So I believe strongly in divided government, and I hope that the Republicans wake up and start campaigning in that direction.
Yeah, and this is interesting because you're right. Abortion has been off the radar screen, the political debate for a year now, given all the rise of the Ukraine threat, the assault of the Russians against Ukraine, the rise in inflation, and the impact that's having on seniors and even homeless people, which a large segment of them are veterans. So there seem to be a lot of more important issues. But I think when I'm just looking at the stories, that the real issue is that the Democrats have one solid position. They just say we favor abortions. They don't have to say whether they support restrictions on abortion. They favor it almost 100% across the board. And they went in with a real clear message in these elections. The Republicans, however, their message seems to be all over the place. Like you said, Virginia's 15 weeks, I think you're right. And some of the other ones are 6 weeks into a pregnancy. So it's really hard to know what it is that Republicans stand for when it comes to abortions. Are they against abortions 100%? Or are they in support of abortions, with certain very, limiting restrictions on when you can have an abortion, which I think is the centrist position, that it shouldn't be, abortion is not a form of birth control. It should never be that. But abortion should be, only permitted under certain circumstances. And I think a lot of Americans would support that. But it sounds like they lost these elections driven, according to the media. I don't know if I completely trust the media, but they say that the issue was abortion. And Republicans are going to have to sit back, like you say, and decide, how do we reconfigure our message going into the bigger elections that are coming up in next year, these primaries.
Yep, they can't ignore it. They've ignored it ever since Roe v. Wade was struck down. And I don't know that they have won an election, an election that has some kind of significance in that period of time. I don't think it's happened. So they better get their act together in regards to this abortion issue and make sure that people understand what their position is, because I think they can get a position that will also be the position of the overwhelming majority of Americans, a centrist position.
Right. And it kind of throws everything else that I've thought about the elections going into next year, off kilter, because I've always believed that Biden was a weak candidate with Kamala Harris. I think the two of them are a terrible team to represent the Democrats, and I think they're a weak team. In fact, this week in the newspaper, I was writing a column about how I think the ideal situation for Republicans, not that it would be easy to do, would be to find to get Biden to not seek reelection and get Kamala Harris out of the picture and slate two strong centrist Democrats like Joe Manchin and maybe even a moderate Republican as a vice president, just to define, a centrist position going into the election. I think that would strengthen the Democratic Party. But if everybody's just going to vote on the issue of abortions, I don't think it really matters whether, Joe Biden is capable of running the country or not, whether Kamala Harris is just a giddy, dancer who just likes to talk and yap. And honestly, I can't think of one message that has stood out from Kamala Harris the entire time over the past 3 years that's been significant. Maybe that doesn't matter if this abortion issue is the dark cloud overseeing this upcoming election. It's going to be interesting.
I am sure with the success the Democrats have had with the abortion issue, they're going to continue to try to make that one of the number one issues
Right.
in the next presidential election. You talk about Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin announced today that he is not running for re-election to the Senate in West Virginia. So he might be available for the, the Republicans or the Democrats aren't going to go after him for president or vice president. But the third party, the no labels people, have often talked about Joe being their candidate for president. It may be
right.
with his announcement today of not running for re-election in West Virginia, maybe he's one step closer to joining the no labels people to run for president.
I'm still wary about a third party. As much as I think it would be great to have a third party, I just can't see a third party candidate ever winning. I think it would be great if they could, even like Robert F. Kennedy, I wish he would have stayed in the Democratic primary and not left it, or he was going to run as a Democrat, and now he's kind of running, isn't he, as an independent?
Yes, he is. He's running as an independent.
Yeah. But his message has been I haven't heard from him,
No,
a lot. I see.
I haven't heard from him recently at all. Well, what have we heard about in the last couple of weeks other than the war in the Middle East?
True. There's one
Radio,
news story,
television, newspapers. That's all that you read about now.
And social media, and we can talk a little bit about that and the impact, and not so much about who's right or wrong in the Israel-Gaza war, but the impact that the Israel-Gaza war is having on, will have on the elections. It certainly dominated the Republican Party debate that took place last night. I watched it. I wasn't very impressed, that Vivek Rashman Swamy did, he made some good, I thought, points against Nikki Haley. And Nikki Haley, I think, is really trying to define herself as the leader, but I think he referred to her as a Dick Cheney in 3-inch high heels. And she responded that, no, I don't wear 3-inch heels. I wear 5-inch heels, and I use them as a weapon, something to that effect. So she did not miss a beat in responding to him. But I don't know if that debate resonated with anybody, especially since the polls continue to show Donald Trump, who's facing 91 indictments in 4 different cases, I think 4 or 5 cases. He still dominates the Republican Party focus of voters, it seems. And I just don't, this changes everything. I think it really kind of throws everything up for grabs. The abortion issue, how Israel-Gaza has taken the focus away from Ukraine. Russia invaded Ukraine almost 2 years ago. and this coming February, and it's almost as if it's disappeared off the map over since the Gaza-Israel war, began. We just don't see it.
About the only thing I've read recently about the Ukraine Russian war is that the president of Ukraine doesn't want to conduct the presidential elections next year because of them being involved in a war. Now, I think that this unfortunately fits right into many Republicans who are very unhappy with us being in that situation with Ukraine and Russia, because they have contended right from the start that we're sending a lot of money and there is no accountability on that we are sending them. That's one of the reasons they refuse to send money to Israel, Palestine, excuse me, and Ukraine, because they wanted
together as one package, right? They didn't want to do it as one package.
And now, with the president wanting not to have the presidential elections next year, that's going to be more fodder for the Republicans to say, like we told you all along, there's no accountability in this money. This government is corrupt. They're really not a democracy. It's going to be more difficult all the time for members of the House and Senate and President Biden to continue to fund this Ukraine war against Russia, which I think would be a terrible mistake. A lot of people, as time goes on, people are tiring of this war. There's no question about that. But I think it would be a mistake for us to stop funding Ukraine, because I think that, we're so far committed, we have to stay there. If we don't, Russians are going to win. It's going to be a loss for us. It will probably motivate the Chinese to give serious consideration to invading Taiwan. We'll have another big problem on our hands.
I think it's already past I think we're past the deadline. I think that the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there used to be real strong support for Ukraine. It was people were waving flags. You'd see flags in front of homes. Now, since the Israel-Gaza conflict and how fast that Congress passed that brought the Congress together, the Republicans together, they needed to come together to give Israel $14.3 billion in funds, and the Republicans who pushed that insisted that they didn't want to deal with the Ukraine funding for Ukraine. They didn't want to blur that support for Israel, because I think from the Republican standpoint, they really believe that supporting Israel is going to be the platform that's going to help them win next year. And I don't believe that's the case. I think that like a lot of wars, emotions drive everything. And certainly most Americans, given the emotions of what happened after the horrendous terrorist attack on October 7th, that's eroding in the face of all these videos of Israel's equally horrendous, if not worse, attacks, against Gaza, with all these buildings being destroyed, some 12,000 civilian Palestinians killed. You can only argue that they're being used as, human shields so much, when 4,000 of those 15,000 or 12,000, or we can't even get accurate numbers, because the media is not being allowed into that region because of this bombing. But when 4,000 of them are children and young kids that are dying, I think that long term, that's going to impact Americans, that they're going to have a second look at this conflict, and it's going to backfire on Israel. I don't think Israel-Gaza is the issue that's going to drive the presidential election, although it did drive the GOP debate last night that we saw. Was a big issue, and everybody was almost 100% lockstep, in support of Israel and supporting Israel's, political rhetoric and demands and claims, without showing any, feelings toward the other civilians that are dying, without blaming it on Hamas. So I am worried about this election, and now I'm wondering, maybe everybody is making a mistake. Maybe the fundamental issues that American voters care about are abortion. Maybe the fundamental issues that Americans care about are, what about us? Inflation is killing us. The food at the market is twice the amount. Gasoline has been brought down a little bit, and that's one of the parameters of how we feel. But the cost of living is horrible. And last night during the GOP debate, I kept hearing them talk about doing something with Social Security. And it wasn't in the sense of let's boost it up. It was we need to eliminate it. We need to come up with another system. It's not going to keep up. And that scares me as a senior. And I think that's going to scare a lot of seniors who aren't living off of big pensions from, in addition to Social Security. So I don't know. Maybe abortion is the only issue that's going to drive this upcoming election.
Well, if that's the case, then the Democrats are going to have a big sweep, because they certainly have swept everything since Roe v. Wade was struck down by the Supreme Court. The debate last night, I really thought got to a point where it was rather boring, to be
Right.
perfectly honest with you. Now, I originally liked Tim Scott very much, but he has disappointed me in each debate. He never says anything that makes him stand out. I really don't like the way he delivers his remarks. I've really been much more supportive of Chris Christie, who I think was very good once again last night. But for some reason, it may be his physical size, I don't know. He just doesn't seem to get any momentum out of these debates. And yet everyone I talk to, and I would say there's 6 or 7 people who I've discussed the debates with today, have said that Christie made a lot of very good points. But I don't really know how far that goes. Nikki Haley, I was disappointed in Nikki Haley, because I thought that she she was being attacked by everybody, because she's
Right.
seen as the front runner besides Trump. But I didn't like the way she responded to it. Now,
Right.
Truthfully, a woman to me is handicapped, because when they are aggressive, that turns off an awful lot of men, and it turns off, many women also. A man
They're
can
at a
be
disadvantage, right?
It's not a problem, but for a woman in politics, it is definitely a disadvantage. And I think that was the ultimate result of that debate last night. Now, the guy that you like because of the position he takes and the things he talks about, what's his name, Ramaswamy?
Yeah.
No,
Ramaswamy. No, you're right. I mean, listen, he has a tough name, and I always believe that, listen, perception is reality. You and I know that going back to the Kennedy Nixon debate, when Nixon, who had far more foreign policy experience, lost to Kennedy because of Kennedy's looks and because Nixon was sweating so much, it gave people an uneasy feeling about him. So how you look in a debate, I think, is so important. Chris Christie doesn't look great, but worse is that his issues, if he had Nikki Haley's aggressive rhetoric, she was very distinct, I thought, on a lot of issues that I don't agree with. But Christie didn't seem to have that kind of oomph, that power behind his words. He seemed kind of, mediocre, like, okay, he had some great issues, but he just couldn't drive that home. So this focus, I think, turned to Nikki Haley and how everybody was trying to attack her, but nobody addressed really the issue of Donald Trump, who still is the, big gorilla in the room. Here the polling shows him
the only
leading.
one of those people that have gone after Trump has been Christie. None of the rest of them have gone after Trump. DeSantis, on an occasion, has somewhat gone after him, but not.
Yeah.
And I thought DeSantis did nothing last night whatsoever.
Yeah, it was. I had asked my wife. I won't say it. I looked at him and I thought, wow, he's kind of weird, strange looking. Maybe he's hiding. I just didn't feel comfortable with him. I didn't think he was a strong candidate. And I didn't hear that whole debate last night. I didn't hear one sharp message that resonated with the real concerns of American voters. And obviously, Americans are concerned about Israel. There's no question about that. And because of the emotions, it seems like that's their priority. But the truth is, I think Americans are really deep down. They still, after the debate and TV is turned off, they're sitting at home looking at their budgets, wondering how they're going to put food on their tables, wondering, are they going to be able to, is their value of their money dropping? I don't think anybody answered that even in the context of addressing foreign policy. I think somebody could have said foreign policy should never undermine the importance of domestic policy. Yes, we should support our allies, but we should never put those interests of our allies above the interests of the American people. And I think that hurts, all of them. The irony is, we don't hear anything from President Biden. He came to Illinois. He seems desperate, trying to exploit this, reopening of a auto factory in Belvedere up north near Rockford. And I just don't know that, that's a typical union thing, but he has a union vote. They're Democrats.
Well, I don't know about that. He has the vote of the leadership of unions, but I don't know how much rank and file support he has. Certainly, last time around, Donald Trump got an awful lot of those, blue collar white individuals' support. But let me ask you this, Ray.
Sure.
You think? I think we both agree that abortion is going to be an issue in the next presidential election. Do you think Ukraine and Russia will be an issue?
I think that the Israel-Gaza war punched the Russian-Ukraine war in the gut, and it's having trouble breathing. And I think that even on top of that is what we've talked about before, that this has been going on now almost 2 years without any end of the sight of the end of the road. There's no vision about how it's going to end. We put up a great fight. I think we've embarrassed the Russians. It makes us feel good, but it hasn't changed anything for us. So I think, I'm worried about this Ukraine war. I've kind of lost interest in it, and because of I'm now looking at it differently because of in my opinion, the kind of the double standards that they have with one invasion versus another invasion. And obviously I'm Middle Eastern, so the Middle Eastern part, I have a bias there. But I wonder if other Americans are looking at it saying, why do we give all this money to Israel, one of the richest and toughest countries in the world? And why are we questioning money for Ukraine, which is the front line in Russia's war against us? So I think there are a lot of contradictions that have people confused, mixed messages. And I'm just not sure how strong of a supporter I am for Ukraine anymore, given everything that's happened. I don't know. Are we fighting, supporting Ukraine because we really believe in democracy? Or are we just doing it because it's a great political issue because we want to use the Russians as the boogeyman to get people afraid so that they will rally behind us and support us in the election? Now I'm looking at it going, well, maybe that was always a political issue to begin with and not really about a Russian threat to the United States or the West. I think it raises some issues and questions.
Well, I think that the situation between Russia and Ukraine concerns people in America primarily because they view that as a lot of their money is being spent in that war. And because of inflation in this country, individuals don't feel like they should be spending so much money, for a foreign power, even though they may very well agree with the Ukraine in regards to their fight against the Russians. It's been going on 2 years. We've spent a lot of money. A lot of money has not been accounted for. More and more people are talking about the corruption that exists in Ukraine. I don't know how much corruption exists any longer. At one time, yes, it very definitely was. It may still be. I don't know. You can't really cover something like that when you're involved in a war. And the situation now, we're shipping more money to Israel. We've shipped, tons and tons of money over the course of the years to Israel. I don't see the two of those subjects in the same way, but they're both costing the American people a lot of money. And let's look at it. What exactly are we getting out of it? Are we defending democracy in Europe and in the Middle East? And is that our job to defend democracy around the world? Where do we draw the line? Because I think we have to draw the line when it starts hurting the American people. And it seems to me that it is definitely not helping the American people. By the same token, I believe in a strong foreign policy. I believe we have to be out there trying to spread democracy and freedom around the world. But there are limits to it. And I think that our government, our leaders have to really think long and hard about how much more money we're going to pour into Ukraine, how much more money we're going to pour into the Middle East.
Well, just a final area, I want to go back to the Ukraine elections that you brought up. I
Yes.
think that's really important, but and maybe we didn't give it enough depth, in discussion. But how do you have an election when you're in the middle of a war? So on the one hand, I sympathize with Zelensky not wanting to have the election. On the other hand, um, there is Zelensky part of that image of corruption that we've always associated with Ukraine, that's been associated with Biden's son, Hunter Biden, with all the years of, it was a communist nation, very brutal, prior to Zelensky. To me, Zelensky always looked like the reformer who was changing Ukraine into being a better country. So I always thought he had that going for him. But when we talk now about this, the feeling of corruption, do you think that that applies to Zelensky, or maybe he's not the
Well,
savior that he thought he would be?
I think it does apply to Zelensky. Rightly or wrongly, I have no idea if he's corrupt or if he's not corrupt. But I will say this, prior to the beginning of this war, his approval rating was under 25% in Ukraine. Now it's probably 75,
Right.
80, 85%. I know at one time it was definitely 85%. But the point I want to make is whether there's a lot of corruption or not, there's more and more people in this country saying, we've given Ukraine an awful lot of money. It's an awful corrupt nation. And all they have to do is keep saying that. The more they say that, the more and more support, Ukraine is going to lose in this country.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm worried about it. And I still think with all these issues that you and I have talked about, and they're very complicated, I think we really touched on a lot of stuff. I think it still comes down to this country not having a powerful, strong voice to be a strong leader around the world. Just because we have money, just because we have a strong military, if it's not conveyed by one individual as a strong leader, then I think we look weak. And I think that's why we're all over the place today. I think we just have weak leadership. I don't see it on the Democratic side. In my column this week, I'm going to argue that they should not run for reelection. We need to find new candidates. I don't want to see the Republicans take over control because I think they're extremists. I don't think Donald Trump should be the president because of all his problems and his failure. He ran and was president for 4 years, and despite some great things that he did or wanted to do, he did a terrible job as president. He had horrible policies, and his attitude was terrible. I think it would be great if we found a centrist who rode the Democratic Party to victory, not because they're Democrats, but because I think that party is better equipped to have a centrist at this point, a Reagan Democrat, I think, running this country, somebody tough and strong, I think would do us a lot of great justice to realign us.
I concur with everything you just said. I would like to say also that I have said right from the beginning, I'm an Israel supporter, and I will continue to be. But I have also said repeatedly that the Israelis have to be very, very careful on their invasion of Palestine and the destroying of buildings and the killing of people, because the more that goes on, the more and more the world is turning against Israel. And, there is no question that has happened. And, I don't know how they accomplish what they want to accomplish, killing, the leadership and I guess the membership of the people who actually attacked them. But, it's getting to be a problem. There's a lot of European nations now are not very enthusiastic about supporting Israel any longer because of the way that they have been conducting this war. So that's another problem. And, we are so committed to them. I was very disappointed that Biden and our Secretary of State tried to convince Netanyahu to have a pause, a 2-3 days pause for just humanitarian. as a PR thing, I think that would have been enormously helpful. And I'm
Right.
also sorry that we don't have the power to, convince Israel that they should have slowed down the destruction of so much in Palestine.
Yeah, and I think on that, and again, not about the war itself, but the political aspect of this. If we had a strong president, they could have talked to Israel and said, "Listen, we're going to support you, but you got to do it this way." But without that, I think Netanyahu is a far right extremist, has taken this to the extreme. I believe it's going to backfire on them. And I think it's hurting because we've seen the protests all over this country. There are a lot of Americans and American Jews who are still opposed to Netanyahu. He is not the favorite of the American Jewish community. Once that emotion settles a little bit, you're going to see all these people go back to wanting Netanyahu out. But without leadership on our part, I think we failed in this conflict to allow Israel to get in there, take out Hamas the proper way. And right now they're doing it the way we tried to do it in Vietnam. Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ, they fabricated the Gulf of Tonkin attack. They carpet bombed Vietnam. We killed so many people. And look what happened to us. I still can't believe that we lost that war, that we, after all that we tried to do, we were the strongest nation in the world, and yet they beat us. And even today, there are big questions about, what is Vietnam doing and what role does it play with the rest of the world? So I don't know. We talked about a lot, Bill. Any final thoughts about any of this?
Well, I'm happy that I'm not president of the United States at the present time, because there are so many problems out there. Many of them would be of Biden's own making, but nevertheless, there's a lot of problems out there. And I don't know how we solve all the problems. And on top of all those things, we still have this great divide in this country, that exists between the great middle of America and the left coast and the right coast. How we can accomplish a great deal internationally without being united, I don't know. So it's very, very difficult, very frustrating, very disappointing that we, the United States of America, would find ourselves in this position.
I never expected us to be where we're at today, given all the discussions that we've had over the past year. And I think this is very complicated, but we can look at it again next week. I was going to say thank everybody for season 2, episode 14 of Two Guys on Politics. Go ahead, Bill.
Oh, goodbye. That's all. I'm finished. You're finished.
But you are an American patriot, Bill, and I think that even though we disagree sometimes on things, I respect your centrist views, always have. You do understand what's going on in the world, and I still learn a lot from you during these discussions. I steal many of your ideas from my column, and I want to thank you publicly. Thank you so much, Bill.
You're more than welcome to it. And I think you do a fantastic job being as objective as you can in regards to Israel and Palestine, because I know what your true sentiment is, but you try to give the people that listen to this podcast an objective opinion.
Yes, I do.
Wonderful day.
All right, everybody. We will see you next week again here at Two Guys on Politics. We'll talk to you again. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.